this meeting to order.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk Cody, roll call, please.
Supervisor Gunning?
Here.
Treasurer Rice is excused. Trustee Hauk?
Here.
Trustee Micus?
Here.
Trustee Lannon?
Here.
Trustee Worley?
Here.
Clerk Cody here.
All right. That brings us to item 4, which is going to be approval of the agenda. We have a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
You have a motion and a second. Discussion? Seeing none, we bring this up to vote. Approval of the agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda approved. We move to public comment. This is going to be restricted to 3 minutes regarding items on this agenda. This is an opportunity for comments only. Questions to the board will not be answered at this time. If anyone would like to come forward for public comment of the items on this agenda. And if you give your name and address, please.
Hi there, my name is Deborah Gray Frankie, and we own property at 905 South Mission Street. We've been before this board before to urge you to consider opting into recreational, medical marijuana, and our understanding is that the board is seeking to opt out of recreational marijuana. Our feelings on this is that there's been no public comment. I think it's to do so is to usurp the will of the voting public, who has said that they do want recreational marijuana. And I question the board's intent here. Respectfully, I question the intent. There's been no call for public comment. There has been no call for input from business owners in Union Township. And it seems to me that the board has made a decision without doing any research or due diligence. I've offered my help in helping you understand the marketplace. I've emailed every one of you and not gotten a response from any of you. That's disconcerting to me. It feels to me as if you've made a decision. And then I just want to speak, with the few minutes left, I just want to speak to the women on the board. Marijuana is a male-dominated industry. This is an opportunity for Union Township to involve women in business and provide an opportunity to really be innovators and be leaders as opposed to followers. I think the opt-out is a bad decision. I would say wait. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And would anyone else like to come forward at public comment at this time? Seeing none, we close public comment and we move on to reports and board comments. Let's go ahead and take care of a little bit of business here while we're at it. So we do have some openings. We have the board of review, and do we have all of their applications in, Mark? I didn't have a chance to look through the agenda completely. I know we've got Mr. LaBelle's and Mr. Therings. Did we get? Yeah, we got Mr. Nyers also. Okay.
They're all in your packet.
Okay, very good. So at this point in time, let's go ahead and look at the recommendations for the board of review. All three of these gentlemen, Mr. LaBelle, has been on the Board of Review now for a year. Has been, in my determination as being the secretary of the Board of Review. His knowledge base in the real estate industry has been invaluable as we go through each of these properties, particularly in the month of March when we get a lot of the appeals in. Mr. Thering has been in for, I'm not sure how many years now. Mr. Priest?
4 years.
4 years. And then Mr. Nyer also has been in? 3. And so it's a pretty well-oiled machine. The only thing we don't have is we don't have at this point in time, unless I'm missing an application, is somebody to fill the role of the alternate. And so we'll have to continue to search for that individual. But at this point in time, I would like to nominate Mr. LaBelle, Doug LaBelle, for the opening on the Board of Review to follow through with another term. And this would be let's see, is this a 2-year? Okay, 2 years. So this would be 2020. So 12/31 of 2020. Any questions or concerns with Mr. LaBelle? Any comments?
Well, I'd make a motion that we appoint Doug LaBelle II to the Board of Review for a 2-year term to run and expire on 12/31/2020.
Second.
Okay, we do have a motion and a second. Further discussion, comments? Okay.
Yeah, the only comment I would make, I am not pointing out anything personally about Mr. LaBelle, but just pointing out the fact that he is a current Planning Commission member, and I don't know if anybody has any reason to think that we should try not to have the same individual on multiple commissions, if there's any reason that a conflict of operations would come forward. I don't see it here in this, and as you say, he brings some expertise in his field.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I just wanted to bring that point out to the board.
I think that's a good point that you bring up, but you know, Doug's been on the Planning Commission now for a year and a half, maybe at least. Plus he's been doing this as well, so there hasn't been any conflicts, you know, to speak of. So I would trust that he would be able to, if there was a need to recuse on anything, that he would, you know, rightfully do so.
Yeah, Mr. LaBelle is definitely a man of character, no question about it. Very strong ethical.
Yes, Ben, if I might, in the particular example that Tim, you're bringing up, is that it really speaks to the small depth of our bench. We don't get a lot of volunteers in the community to step up and do these important jobs. So, you know, hats off to Mr. LaBelle to want to take on 2 positions. It's an opportunity, I mean, future opportunities for people to step up and do more, but I'd support and vote yes for Mr. LaBelle when the moment comes.
Thank you. Any further comments at all? Okay, seeing none, let's go ahead and take this up for vote. Now, does this need to be a roll call, or is it just need voice?
This would be voice.
Voice, okay. All right. So all in favor of affirming Mr. Doug LaBelle's membership on the Board of Review for a 2-year term expiring 12/31/2020, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion does carry. Mr. LaBelle is appointed to another term. Gentleman number 2 would be Mr. James Thering. His expiration date would also be 12/31/2020. Again, Mr. Thering is well-educated, very excited about being on the Board of Review. I mean, he loves it, and he really loves to learn. I've known Jim for probably over 30 years, and you know, he's a very solid individual. So I would like to nominate him for this term.
Support.
We have to make a motion.
You have to make a motion.
I'll make a motion that we appoint James Thering to a 2-year term on the Board of Review ending 12/31/20.
I'll support your nomination, Bill.
Okay. Any comments on Mr. Thering?
Another good choice, so.
Okay,
As
so-
you said, Ben, he does like it. I mean,
Yep.
he skips fish fries to come in with it.
So this will be affirming Mr. Thering's position on the Board of Review for a 2-year term, and this would expire 12/31/2020. All in favor of Mr. Thering, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Mr. Thering is again affirmed as a member of the Board of Review till 12/31/2020. The final nomination would be Mr. Brian Nyer. Mr. Nyer also, you know, I mean, it's, the Board of Review is kind of like the unsung heroes, really. I mean, it's long days. Some of these sessions are ridiculously long, and particularly in March. And, you know, to get people to want to do this, you know, like these 3 guys that are invested in it, is very difficult because there's really not a lot of payoff here. I mean, they're there because they want to help and they want to be involved. So I would fully like to nominate Mr. Nyer, Mr. Brian Nyer, for again a 2-year term, and this would expire 12/31/2020. Do we have a nomination or a motion, I should say?
I'll make a motion that we nominate, or that we reappoint Brian Nyer to the Board of Review with a term ending 12/31/20.
Support.
Okay. Discussion on Mr. Nyer?
Brian has all the knowledge we'd ever want with ag ground, and then he's also a businessman. He employs many people.
Further discussion? All right, let's take this up for vote, and this would be the appointment of Mr. Brian Nyer for a 2-year term expiring 12/31/2020. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Appointment made. We move on to, let's see, our next one on the agenda would be the Hannah's Park Park. And so this will be our representative that expires as our manager, Mr. Mark Stuhldreher. And I'm assuming Mr. Stuhldreher would like to go another, and this would be, what, a 10-year term?
10 years.
Because we could change that probably if we wanted to right now.
I'd make a motion to nominate Mark Stuhldreher to Hannah's Park Advisory Board
All right,
for a 2-year term.
2-year term, okay.
Support.
All right, so this would be an expiration date of 12/31/2020. Any further discussion on Mr. Stuhldreher? All right, so this would be to appoint Mr. Stuhldreher to that role as being our member or representative, or one of our 2 representatives on the Hannah's Park Advisory Board for an expiration date of 12/31/2020. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Woof, woof.
All right, and then was that a?
That was an aye.
Okay, all right. I wasn't sure in dog language what that was, so. All right, so motion does carry. And we move on to our final nomination, and this would be Robert Bacon on the EDA. I'm not sure how many years that Mr. Bacon has been on the EDA, but I find him refreshing because he is there every meeting. Which is not that easy on some of these boards, is to get somebody that is willing to show up every meeting. But also what I love about Robert is that he's there with his laptop every meeting, and when all the expenditures, as Mark can probably concur, is Mr. Bacon always will have a question about the expenditure. He's very fiscally conscious. I find him to be very thorough and an excellent member of that board. So I would definitely like to nominate him for another term, and this would be a 4-year term. And for Mr. Bacon, this would be an expiration date of 1/13/2023. It's hard to say that, 2023.
So true. I would move that we appoint Robert Bacon to a term on the EDA board expiring in 2023.
Support.
Okay, we do have motion and support. Any further discussion?
I liked his jingle down here. I think it'd be great for our township. Strong communities are the result of our choices today. I like that. We could probably have that as a little lingo here.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. All right. So we do have motion, support, comments. Any further comments on Mr. Bacon? All right. I'll pass that on to Robert too, that you
All
like
right.
that, by the way. Maybe he should trademark it or something
Yeah.
first before you
It's
start
good.
jumping in. All right. So this will be for the appointment of Mr. Robert Bacon for a 4-year term on the Economic Development Authority Board. And this will be a 4-year term expiring 1/13 of 2023. There I go. I spit it out of my mouth. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Mr. Bacon has got a 4-year appointment. All right. So next item up will be the Board of Trustees monthly activity report. We do have that in our agenda. Would anybody like to discuss that item at all?
Not part of your packet. It'll be sent out
It's-
separately.
Well, you sound, okay, all right. And so, C, Planning Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals updates.
Good evening, Board. I'm here to talk about the ZBA and the Planning Commission for the month of December. Both the Planning Commission and the Zoning Board of Appeals have adopted their 2019 regular schedule calendar of meetings. The ZBA will continue to meet on the first Wednesday of each month, and the Planning Commission will continue to meet on the third Tuesday of each month. The Planning Commission held a special meeting with our consultant McKenna, where McKenna had provided the Planning Commission with a diagnostic review of our current zoning ordinance. This is part of the agreement that we reached with our consultant when we chose them to be our consultant for this zoning ordinance update and review. The Planning Commission took no action on this diagnostic review. It didn't require any action. It was simply an acceptance, and we reviewed the report with the consultant. The Planning Commission, at a regularly scheduled meeting this month, held one item for a special use permit. This was for a public and institutional use, specifically a government facility. The Isabella County Road Commission requested on behalf of the current owner, William Irvin, to construct a new ICRC administration building and facility. This would be located, proposed, at South Lincoln Road, just down the road from here. It's currently vacant, so it doesn't have an address. After careful consideration and much public input at the public hearing, the Planning Commission made a recommendation of denial. That recommendation will make its way to the Board of Trustees, where ultimately that recommendation will be approved or denied. The Zoning Board of Appeals, they held a variance hearing this month. It was for a variance from the section of the zoning ordinance which requires sidewalks to be shown on projects requiring site plan review. This was for the Riverwood Golf Course. Operates special use permit, had been approved, site plan had been amended, required to construct sidewalks. Ultimately, the Zoning Board of Appeals, after holding public hearing and careful deliberation, voted to grant the variance from the sidewalk being required at that location on the condition that the variance would only be pertaining to that project of the accessory building. Any other future development or work on the site that would require site plan review, the variance would not apply. So that's in short what the Zoning Board of Appeals and Planning Commission have been up to this month.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
All right, let's go ahead and do our update on meetings that we've attended. Norm, we'll start with you.
I have none for tonight.
Okay. Lisa?
I don't have any either.
Nothing? Okay. Tim?
Yeah,
Anything from the county?
last evening I attended the Isabella County Board of Commissioners' regular scheduled meeting. And as you may or may not know, it started out with a bit of a honoring ceremony of Commissioner David Ling, who's been on the county board for 22 years, I believe it is. And last night was going to be his last board meeting. So the board members all had something very nice to say about Mr. Ling. And he certainly has been a terrific mentor and leader in the county government over those 22 years. Also, there was a whole host of appointments to boards and commissions. And to list those off, there were 2 appointments to the Board of Public Works. Paul Gross and Tim Wolf were appointed. Commission on Aging Advisory Board, Jackie Curtis was appointed, along with Jessica Lapp. And on the Construction Board of Appeals, Gerald Stewart was appointed, and Gerald Konwinski was appointed. To the Construction Board of Appeals regarding plumbing trades, Robert Myers was appointed. John Haupt was appointed to the 911 Advisory Board. To the Human Rights Committee, Dawn Jevics was appointed to that spot. Material Recovery Facilities Advisory Board, Denise Webster was appointed. To the Parks and Recreation Committee, there were 2 appointments, and that was Craig Klingen and John Dinsey. To the Planning Commission, 2 appointments, Kelly Bean and Gerald Nyer. To the Transportation Commission, Matt Mertz. To the Veteran Affairs Committee, there were 2 appointments, Russell Allwood and Lee Coughlin. To the Zoning Board of Appeals, Tom Riley was appointed, and that concluded the appointments. And another point of interest has to do with the Farmland Preservation Act. There were 2 pieces of property that were moved and supported to be put in that program. One was a 122 acre piece of property, and it's being put in for the maximum length of time, which is 90 years. There was a smaller parcel put in. They didn't really indicate for how long, but a 45 acre piece of farmland from the Double D Dairy was put in. The first one I didn't mention, but as Gabriel and Aaron Papio farmland was the 122 acres. And that concluded information from the meeting.
Thank you, Tim.
You're welcome.
You know, it's an interesting article in the paper was the relationship between George Green and David Lang. And it's interesting to me as you have 2 people that are polar opposites of the spectrum as far as philosophies are concerned, but yet they found common ground, you know, for this many years and are apparently great friends. So I think that was, you know, to me was very, very interesting. And you know, I've had the opportunity to sit in some stuff with David as Norm has also, and George. So yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you for your service.
their friendship was certainly highly appreciated between the 2. They both started at the same year on the commission, both 22 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, that's great that they've dedicated themselves. And it's interesting, too, in the appointments that you mentioned, there's some crossover from Union Township. I noticed a few names that are very familiar. Denise Webster, obviously, one of our planning commission members. And, you know, it's interesting you see people that get involved at one level want to get involved in other levels, too. So I think that's awesome. Phil?
I haven't attended any meetings since we last met a week ago, but I did have an observation. You know, at our last meeting, we approved a directive to the manager to find a way to get some sidewalks in on Bluegrass Road. We identified 2 stretches. Last Saturday, I'm driving along there, and sidewalks in one of those stretches, the stretch just west of the strip mall that has the mattress place and the coffee shop. Obviously, it probably was planned before we made our motion, but half your work is done, Mark.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice work, Mark.
Good job.
We can add that 30-foot stretch of non-sidewalk between
Yeah,
Target
that's an
and-
interesting piece.
Yeah.
I saw that. I'll have to track down who owns it. And
But you thought it was
I think it's a right of way.
a right-of-way. So who owns the right-of-way?
I don't know. There's a stretch that goes, maybe Peter would know that. I believe we talked about that once in a planning commission meeting. Not to put you on the spot. I think that right of way was the one that it goes behind J.C. Penney, and it comes out parallel to the new road that goes in by the Marriott. And it's a 25-foot stretch and a piece or something like that. And I believe that was a right of way. Am I mistaken, or?
I don't remember, off the top of my head, I believe, I thought it was about a 66-foot stretch. I don't know if it was ever designated to be a right-of-way, maybe it was intended to be a right-of-way.
Right.
Pat could correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's still just an active parcel. It's owned B4, General Business District.
well, I didn't want
All
to
right.
distract us from
No,
our
I mean,
agenda,
we
so
got
that's all I had
Peter's
for
brain
today.
working here.
But
so
thanks for the
that's-
information,
yeah,
Peter.
He'll probably think of it like, what, 2 o'clock in the morning? You go ahead and give Norm a call and Phil a call when that happens.
I'll be waiting.
I'm sure they'll answer too.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Phil. Bill?
I went to the road commission meeting last Thursday morning. They introduced 3 new employees, which is pretty cool how they do this with their employees now. They try to keep them in their own township. So the 3 new guys, they're all stationed right out of their township, so reaction times are faster. They approved a $600,000, Representative Roger Hauk, got that $600,000 from MDOT for the reconstruction of Lincoln Road to Broomfield Road from the bridge to Broomfield Road. They approved that contract, and that's pretty much it that pertains to us.
Well, I had a couple things. EDA yesterday. We have the park bench and the waste receptacle refurbishment program going on, which is going, everything's been removed. If you drive down there, you notice that there's no waste receptacles or benches. They're all dismantled. They're all in the midst of being refinished, so that's way ahead of schedule, I think. And then the interesting part was we were able to figure out there was, I believe, 45 of the bench slats were broken or cracked. And it turns out, believe it or not, after 20 years, the doggone things are under warranty. So, so wonderfully enough, I mean, these things are going to come out, pretty good condition. They're going to look like new, and potentially I think we're going to save ourselves probably 35, 40 grand in the process. So, I think that was huge, and that was a great program. I'm glad that we were able to do this. Number 2, and this was something that kind of came up at the spur of the moment, but I did go to a special meeting at the Deerfield Township Hall on Monday at noon in reference to a parcel that's directly across the street from, basically on the west side of Meridian. So we share a road. And Mr. Littenmuth is on the Planning Commission at the Deerfield, and I think in public comment he's going to probably discuss this a little bit with us. But it's something that should be a little bit on our radar. It's a construction or sand and gravel operation that maybe didn't necessarily go through the proper protocol. A decision was made in court, and they're going to be operating, but then the problem is that they're going to be operating not only on the Deerfield Township Road, but also the Union Township Road. And so the question being is the way that road is manufactured or built with the heavy traffic that's going to be going in and out of that facility, and how it affects us, and maybe our appropriation of monies to keep those roads up to date and in check. So I think he's going to kind of talk a little bit about that at the public comment. So, but yeah, it was interesting. So I felt it was on the radar. We should probably have some knowledge of it. So other than that, do we have any else who would like to speak at all in board comments? All right. So let's move on, and I have to get my agenda back up here just a second. And we're going to be moving into the consent agenda. We do need a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
And we have somebody look at the tables.
Yep, everything looks okay.
Okay. All right. So this would be a motion to approve the agenda. We have a motion. We have a second, correct?
Well, we didn't get a second.
We didn't get a second yet.
I'll second it.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda is approved. Item 10, new business. The first item up is going to be consider the approval of a service agreement with Municipal Consulting Services, LLC, to conduct a compensation classification study. Mark.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. The item in front of you is on, the information begins on page 22 of your agenda packet. And as we've been talking about for quite some time now, we've been wanting to have a classification compensation study conducted for the organization. And this is to help us recruit and retain a workforce that meets the current and long-term needs of the organization. Having one of these studies done periodically, reviewing classifications, compensation schedules, evaluating and analyzing job descriptions. We should have one of these done every so often. The last one that was done here in the township was 2011. A request for proposal was put together with input from across the organization, sent out to approximately 10 firms where we were seeking bids. I believe I shared that list of the firms that we did the outreach to with the board at the beginning of that process. We received a single bid back, and that was from Municipal Consulting Services, LLC. The review team, which was comprised of folks from the bargaining groups of the bargaining leadership of the bargaining units, non-bargaining unit folks, myself. We reviewed that proposal, and we were looking at a couple things. One is if the proposal was responsive to the objectives that were outlined in the request for proposal. And then we also had some discussion about whether or not we should put this out for rebid, since we'd only received one proposal. The consensus of the group was that the proposal was responsive to the request for proposal. It met all the objectives we were looking to obtain, and there was also concurrence amongst the group to bring this forward to the board with the recommendation that the Board of Trustees approve this service agreement. Municipal Consulting Services, they are an experienced firm in this area. We checked the references. There was a long list of references. They're in the packet as well. I spoke to the folks from the Human Resource Department of Ann Arbor, as well as the State of Michigan's Office of State Employer, and they spoke, both entities spoke very highly of this firm. And the township used municipal consulting services for a similar study back in 2011, the last time we had this done. And from everything I've been able to gather and looking at their report back then, the township was very satisfied with this firm. So we do have some personal experience with this firm. The deliverables include establishing a list of comparable employers that we can benchmark against to conduct a market survey of wages and benefits, developing a classification structure for the various positions within the organization, developing competitive pay ranges. Also, projects going to include making recommendations for equitable pay and per diem rates for the elected officials' positions and the various per diems for the boards that we appoint people to, planning commission and board of review and so forth. The firm will also assist in the implementation of the findings of this study. We will undoubtedly find that some positions are above or below the benchmark, and then the question becomes how, what do you do with that, and how do you move positions around to get into the recommended bands. That would also involve, of course, negotiations if it involves positions within collective bargaining agreements, and they'll also help us develop a system so that we can maintain that classification and pay structure moving forward, so that we can try to stay in market, stay competitive with the market, maintain internal equity within the organization. The cost of the agreement is $14,850, and I want to say in 2011 it was $11,000. So if you looked at the extrapolation of the percentage increase over the 10 years, it was nothing out of the ordinary. So we recommend approving this service agreement, and would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
I'd make a motion that we approve the service agreement with Municipal Consulting Services, LLC, to conduct a compensation classification study for the organization at a cost not to exceed $14,850.
Hey, Norm, would you consider adding to your motion the acceptance of the presentation of a final report to the board? It's not included in that base price. It's highlighted in their cover letter.
Yes, it is.
It's approximately $250 plus expenses, but if we refer to that fourth bullet point in your motion, I could support it.
Okay. So I know what you're talking about. I don't see it right now.
Well, perhaps
it'd
we could
be
just
on the front page of their market municipal consulting services, so it'd be page 25.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so I will. So what we want to have then is for the final presentation.
Yeah, and I don't think you need to get into a lot of detail.
Yeah.
Just it would be to accept the final presentation to the board at the rate that they described in their cover letter.
Okay, so it will stay as is, not to exceed the $14,850, with the exception of a final report presentation to the board at an additional cost of $125 per hour for approximately 2 hours.
And they have some other travel and
Yeah.
expenses as well.
Possibly lodging expenses.
And travel,
Yeah.
mileage, and possible lodging. So at whatever costs are incurred, rather than, it's getting kind of lengthy.
I support that.
Right.
Okay.
And I think that it'll be very useful to us, for me anyway, to have a report. This is a very important item for
I
us, and
agree.
we've discussed
Yeah.
wages and salaries.
Yeah.
And yeah, they did a fine job in 2011 with the report. They've done a lot of great work. You can see in their list of references, sounds like they probably have all the data they need,
Yeah.
except for focusing on what we have right now.
Right. Well, I also, this is something, Bill, that you have been asking for
Yeah.
quite a while, you know, to have a comparative analysis, to look at our different job descriptions and that, and how it is, and look at making it a competitive pay structure, one in terms, both in terms of wages and benefits. So I'm glad to see that we're finally getting this going. And they're not only looking at just the township staff, but also the elected officials and people on appointed boards. I think that's good. And as Mark indicated, I mean, there was like 3 pages long of references of all the different municipalities and townships that they've done work for. So very impressive resume.
Do we have 27 different job classifications, or that's just how many they cover in general? Or do we have 27 different job classifications?
We have 27 different job classifications.
Really?
There'll be a number of ways that those can be counted, but when you consider a board appointment as a classification, an elected official as a classification, and that might have been accounted 3 different ways as a trustee, supervisor, treasurer, and clerk.
Okay. Well, I just thought when I read that, I thought I think we have 28 full-time employees, and I thought, wow, we
Well.
have 27 different classifications for 28 employees. I thought that was kind of,
We have more classifications than we should have.
Oh,
it sounds like it.
You almost have a classification for each position, and likely to get away from that a little bit.
Further discussion?
I guess what jumped out at me was we put it out specifically to 10 entities and had it posted on the Michigan Municipal League website, and receiving 1 response. That's fairly slim, but
Might be not a lot of companies that do this, apparently.
well, there must be
Mhm.
Well, we put
at
it out
least
to
10
10
if we
people.
found 10 folks that we felt could bid on
Yeah.
it. But you know, we found that in other areas, soliciting employees for positions and things, and
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily getting a lot of response back.
Right. Yeah.
Further discussion? All right, let's take this up for vote then. Wow, you guys are gonna make me work on this one. Let me go back to the front page on this thing, and I'll try to tack on Norm's addition here.
All right,
Can-
we know the proposal. For it to read it again.
Yeah, this is going to be to consider the approval of a service agreement between with Municipal Consulting Services LLC to conduct a compensation classification study for the organization, and this is going to be for a total of where's the number at here? Is the 14,000.
850.
14,850 with the addition of the necessary expenditures involved in having them come and present the findings to this board for no more than a 2-hour period. All in favor?
Aye.
I think I got that right, didn't I? All right.
Thank you, and just before moving on, Mr. Notley of this firm, assuming that the board had approved this tonight, is scheduled to come out January 9th and have a kickoff meeting with the organization late in the afternoon, and then he'll also be sitting down and doing a brief presentation to the board that night to let you know what's in store going forward.
All right, let's move this to item B in new business. This is going to be the board adoption of the FY 2019 appropriations resolution for the following funds: general, fire, special assessment, East DDA, West DDA, 2% grant, sewer and water, and adoption of the 2019 fee schedule. Mark?
So the paperwork begins on page 54 of your agenda packet. The funds that require appropriation resolutions were listed a moment ago by the chair. I won't repeat those. The Uniform Budget Act does require that the budget for the next upcoming fiscal year be approved by 12/31 of 2018. The township has received this budget back in, the board received it back in October. We've had some meetings and discussions about the budget. There was a public hearing held last week. The recommended budget has been available for review by the public here at Township Hall and also on the website. The public hearing was posted and, as I said, held last week. The budget, I believe, effectuates and helps advance the board's and the community's goals and objectives, and also meets or exceeds all the financial policies that are currently in place. We recommend that you adopt the attached resolution, which also references the 2019 fee schedule. So the appropriation resolution will allow us to spend the funds that are appropriated in those several funds that were listed and charge the fees that are in that schedule that were at your dais tonight.
I'd make a motion for board adoption of the fiscal year 2019 appropriations resolution for the following funds: general, fire, special assessment, East DDA, West DDA, 2% grant, sewer and water, and the adoption of the 2019 fee schedule.
I'll support that.
All right. Discussion?
Annually at this time of year, we approve the budget for the following fiscal year. And this is a very important document in the sense that it really guides the board on what we have identified as important to the community. Again, it is a living document, so as the year goes on, we monitor and make adjustments, but it really is the footprint for what's going to take place next year. And as we go through the year and often come up with great ideas and things we need as board members and get a little gung-ho at times and say, yeah, we need to do this, we always need to remember that we have established what our footprint is before us as to what is important for the fiscal year, and need to understand that there are limitations on the monies available to us, and but we always are planning for the future for major project expenditures.
I had noticed one thing on the fee schedule that we might want to take a look at, and that is in the water and sewer, we have an after-hours turn-on, turn-off rate of $50. Now, the problem is that our ordinance is $30. So either we have to lower the fee, in my mind, to $30, or we have to change the ordinance.
What page it's on?
What's that?
Page 2. So I don't know
This page?
quite, because it should be confluent, correct? So either we have to update the ordinance or we have to adjust this.
We kind of had that in front of us fairly recently, Ben, and it's, so you're recollecting with that particular situation, it was a $30
Yeah, it was $30
fee.
for after hours, yeah.
And there's no provision in the ordinance for raising those rates. If not, if there's no provision in that, I think you're right.
Yeah.
We should direct the administration to make an adjustment in that fee if it's not inconsistent, if it's not consistent with our ordinance.
Oh,
Yeah.
I can confirm, and
Yeah.
I think at a minimum, the motion could be approval of the resolution and the fee schedule with the understanding that that particular fee is looked at and comports with the ordinance, and then I'll bring back that finding to the board.
Okay,
Very good.
all right. Further discussion? All right. So this would be to adopt the FY 2019 appropriations resolution for the following funds: general, fire, special assessment, East DDA, West DDA, 2%, sewer and water, and the adoption of the 2019 fee schedule, with the disclaimer that this one particular fee, the turn-on, turn-off rate is confluent with the stated fee in our ordinance. What's that? Is a roll call? Okay, and this will be a roll call vote.
Supervisor Gunning?
Yes.
Trustee Hauk?
Yes.
Trustee Micus?
Yes.
Trustee Lannon?
Yes.
Trustee Worley?
Yes.
Clerk Cody, yes.
All right, motion carries. And we move on to our next new business, and this is the problem with me not grabbing a paper agenda when I came in, but I've got it down. All right, so this is going to be item C, and this is going to be, again, a discussion action item. This is going to be to consider the approval of a resolution, designating the Mount Pleasant Fire Chief serving in the capacity of the Charter Township of Union Fire Chief as the Charter Township of Union's fire code official.
Thank you. The, as I'm sure you recall, at the November 28th Board of Trustees meetings, the board approved the renewal of a fire service agreement with the city of Mount Pleasant. And by approving that agreement and also by adoption of the International Fire Code by ordinance, the Mount Pleasant Fire Chief serves officially as in the capacity as the Charter Township of Union's Fire Chief. The agreement also recognizes that as the township's fire chief, there's also reference made to a fire code official in that agreement. And the International Fire Code requires that the governing body explicitly name a fire code official. And that reference was made in the fire service agreement. At the time you approved that agreement, there was a date that was left blank that referenced the date that the resolution naming the fire code official was adopted. And so this resolution tonight explicitly appoints the Union Fire Chief, Union Township Fire Chief, as also the Union Township Fire Code official.
All right. Need a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the resolution designating the Mount Pleasant Fire Chief serving in the capacity of Charter Township of Union Fire Chief as the Charter Township of Union's Fire Code official.
Support.
Motion and support. Discussion.
It's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just completes the process, and that's what we needed to do in terms of liability as well. So I think this is the right thing.
Yep. Great relationship with the city. So, all right. So, any further discussion? We'll take this up for vote. And this is going to be to approve the resolution designating the Mount Pleasant Fire Chief serving in the capacity as the Charter Township of Union Fire Chief and as the Charter Township of Union's Fire Code official. All in favor, say
Roll
aye.
call.
Is this roll call? Excuse me. Okay.
So Supervisor Gunning?
Yes.
Trustee Hauk?
Yes.
Trustee Micus?
Yes.
Trustee Lannon?
Yes.
Trustee Worley?
Yes.
Clerk Cody, yes.
All right. So this is going to be item D on your agenda. This is going to be to introduce ordinance 2019-01, namely the Charter Township of Union Prohibition of Marijuana Establishments Ordinance.
So on page 75 of your agenda packet, you'll have some materials on this item. November 6th, I believe that's the right date, the last election, most recent election, the state electorate approved proposal 2018-1, which allows for the possession and use of recreational marijuana. The township cannot prohibit or regulate the use of marijuana outside of that act. but the township may prohibit through ordinance any and all establishments relating to marijuana, or otherwise commonly referred to as facilities. And so there's this item in front of you tonight which by ordinance would prohibit some entity from coming into the township wanting to set up shop, so to speak, to create an establishment that might, say, for instance, sell marijuana. The regulations for that activity are going to be set by the state, the licensing bureau. They have a year to do that. And so in my mind, this is more of an insurance policy, if you will, that until the state defines those regulations, adopts those regulations, then we would have, as a township, a better idea of what we can do in the area of regulation on the establishments. And at that time, additional consideration could be given to rescinding this ordinance and then adopting appropriate, whether it's zoning regulations or other regulations by general ordinance to regulate the establishments. This has nothing to do with personal possession or use of marijuana.
Mark, can I just ask a question? Why we use the Charter Township of Union prohibition of marijuana? Is there establishment ordinances? Instead of, was there a reason why we use, is that how it had to be worded rather than an opt-out? You know, the prohibition has a different connotation, or, you know, I think for the public as well as, you know, for even for the board, whereas the opt-out was something that we had to do if we were going to just simply take some time to assess, get the facts, etc. So is there a way of changing that wording, or why was that
I think I understand your question. The and I'll just make a distinction. When it came to medical marijuana, the township had to actively opt in
correct
to avail itself to those opportunities. With recreational marijuana, the township has to actively opt out. Otherwise, the facilities are allowed by rule to exist here. And so the resolution would prohibit those facilities, those establishments from existing here. Mm-hmm. Might be another way of saying opting out. But,
right, I'm just wondering, instead of the prohibition, if there would be another way of phrasing that that would be more understandable, because I think that this might have some inconsequential effects in terms of people maybe not understand hearing a prohibition, which carries a different tone to it, you know. Because what I thought what this was about was an opt-out.
it's an ordinance that would prohibit the establishment
Correct.
of these facilities in the township.
Right.
It would prohibit it until such time as the board rescinded this ordinance.
And this is just for recreational, not medical, or both?
It's just for recreational. The township has not opted in for medical marijuana, so those facilities cannot exist in the township.
All right.
All right, we do need to get a motion on the table.
Okay.
Go to the next subject then.
Okay. All right. We move from item D to item E. And this is going to be a discussion action item. This is policy governance, global governance process.
So this policy is on page 79 of your agenda packet. 3.0 is reviewed annually by the Board of Trustees, and this policy states that results of the board are to be achieved at an appropriate cost, and the avoidance of unacceptable situations. And like we do every month, it's just before you for your own discussion.
At this point, let's go ahead and open up the discussion.
May I?
Yes, sir.
Start off? I'd like to let you know, too, that Tim was called to an emergency as part of his fire person duty to a serious accident. Addressing the issue before us today, the policy governance, and a review of essentially review of our performance as a board. So we're talking about this board, 7 members. Have we done some of the right things as far as our policy governance document talks about? And I think we have. We've faithfully and correctly discharged our duty of good, sound fiduciary guidance of the taxpayer dollars. Though there's some other sections of the review process that I wouldn't be as positive about. The one section of Board Policy 3.0 about achieving appropriate results for appropriate persons and avoiding unacceptable actions and situations. I think this board and particular individual members of the board has conducted themselves in some unacceptable ways and creating some unacceptable situations. You know, we've discussed in open board meetings dissatisfaction with the way, Ben, you've performed your role as supervisor. You know, we've discussed how there's a delineation of roles in the township between that of the supervisor and that of the township manager. You know, and there was some growing pains from the start. I know, you know, you had some frustrations you expressed to me about issues. You were getting used to the fact that, you know, you weren't the boss of everything, and that your role is really narrowed down to essentially chairman of this board. And we all have learned that we have duties and responsibilities, and most of those powers that are given to us are really here when we're sitting as a board and not as individual members, except for certain other, you know, statutory duties of the clerk, for example, and elections and registering voters and all that solely remains in the clerk's office. And so it's been a learning curve for all of us, and particularly for you, Ben, because you have this leadership role here on the board. But you know, I'm still seeing a conflict between board stated and approved policies, board stated approved policies and procedures, and your actions. And I'll address two. What I'm seeing are your actions to really defeat our board approved policies and procedures, and that those actions don't promote well-being and common good of our township. A couple examples. A year ago in June when the flood, right after a board meeting that followed that, you took me aside here in this meeting, let me correct that, in this meeting room, you and I were talking. You were talking to me, and you were making these strong assertions that our staff and administration violated state law. Subsequently, with all the upheaval that came from that point of view expressed in the community, we invested money in a study, plus over 20 grand in a study, independent body, to look at that particular assertion, as well as the physical operation of all of our machines and the processes that went through and all of that stuff. The result of that study was no error on the part of the board, on the part of the township. And then just tonight, when you and I were communicating about this prohibition of marijuana issue, you and I were essentially in support of not being behind. We were against the prohibition, but you were digging up, you were making assertions in our communication that was plain and simple to me that you were trying to pin this development of the prohibition ordinance on someone other than the board. These are very divisive things that harm the board, harms the administration, and harms the community. And I'm losing confidence in you. I've lost confidence in you as being our supervisor.
I agree. Ben, there's times I've tried to talk to you, I've had phone conversations with you, telling you the frustrations of everyone. You've agreed, yes, I need to change. You've gotten worse. I mean, you sent me a text last Thursday attacking another board member because he said he couldn't make it to a meeting. Earlier today, I got a phone call from an elected county official that said where you specifically said the problems that we're having in our township with our board right now are the fault of Norm and Mark Stooldryer. Don't look at me confused, Ben. The guy flat out told me you had a conversation with him this morning, and those are the two names that you gave him. He said that you told him that the problems with our board and our township right now are Norm Worley and Mark Stooldryer.
Yeah, well, I didn't have that conversation.
Well, you just don't remember things. One day I called you and you told me that you were here in a meeting one night and you basically shut 2 or 3 of us off when we were talking. You kept putting words in my mouth. I tried to say something. You shut me down. You shut Phil down that night. You shut Mark down. When we're trying to talk, you cut us off. But when you want the floor, you take the floor, and you don't listen to anybody else. You've gotten us in trouble for a few things, and I think you're going to continue to get us in trouble for a few things if you don't start cooperating with everyone and following policies. I'm surprised we haven't gotten sued for some stuff you've said.
I'll follow up. You did say something about myself and Mark today. To an elected county official who called Bill to let them know that they were concerned with what you were saying. Ben, that has absolutely no place whatsoever. But let's shake your head to that one.
Norm, I had no conversation. I had conversation with a county official, but had nothing to do, or your names were never even mentioned. So it was simply a discussion of last night's meeting.
No, we're not gonna. No. So, anyway, let's go back to last week. Last week, we were talking about noncompliance and non-adherence to the policy governance. It's not about the differentiation of powers. It's about how we conduct ourselves ethically, both inside and outside of this board. And Ben, the way you've been behaving and some of the things that I hear from people is not very ethical. What happened last week will be an example. When I talked to you when I was speaking last week about the non-adherence and the non-compliance, I was speaking directly to you. I didn't mention you by name, but I was looking at you and mentioning all this. What I was concerned about is that the next day, you then texted Bill, Lisa, Kim, with some very unflattering things about me.
I didn't get that text.
You didn't get the text, okay, but Bill got it, and so, well, why not
I
just
don't
read it?
remember texting Kim.
No, not Tim, and Bill, but Bill got this one. Well, Bill, how did you like being called a slow learner? Lisa and I are pretty happy with that classification. I was learning in these sessions, and we were fixing policies as we were proceeding. I think we need to continue in January. Norm can't be busy all that month. If so, then he needs to return his salary. He was the only person with an issue on these consultations. I'm not going to be compliant in a system until it's fixed. That's a text that went to Bill.
Yep.
I want you to know that all the texts, the emails, the calls that you make to any board member, we work in unity and we work together as a team, that immediately those things get shared among ourselves. So we know what you're up against. We know what we're up against with the things that you're doing.
Yep. Well, I tell you what, how did
Let me just finish. I'm not done. I'm not
okay,
done
go
with
ahead.
Ben.
Go ahead.
Unfortunately, there's so much time and energy that gets devoted to dealing with these non-compliant issues, which distracts the board from fully engaging on our ends, which is about what this policy governance is about. And this issue's been addressed with you multiple times and with negligible result. You continue to text, email, call different board members at different times. The texts, the calls, the emails, they're contemptuous, they're manipulative, and they're derogatory. They serve to undermine, they attempt to pit each one of us against each other, and they're divisive. And ultimately, Ben, this is not in the best interest of our residents or as our community. We have to work in a way in which we respect one another, that we're unified, and there's solidarity. That's what we owe to our community. It's what we owe to our residents. When you're out there and promoting things that are half-baked truths and telling people, like with the situation that Phil was indicating, that's a disturbance. That's a disturbance because it loses the trust and the confidence that people have in us as a board. And this has to stop. This has gone on too long. And you sit here, you take it in, and then I know tomorrow there'll be some other explosion. It'll be your version of your tweets that are going to go out again about Norm Worley or any other board member saying something against you. It has to stop, Ben. All we want is to work together as a board. In the best interest of this community. We all care about the residents, about the community, and about the future of this community. But when you do things that are so undermining and so derogatory behind your backs, it just takes it gets us distracted in what we have to be doing. And finally, I agree with Phil. I have right now no trust and no confidence in your ability to serve as supervisor in this township. I think if you continue with these behaviors, we will have a vote of no confidence that maybe you need to step down because this is not working, Ben, with what you're doing. It's unfair to it's not only unfair to the staff, it's unfair to this board, it's unfair to the township, it's unfair to the residents. And all we're asking for is for this to stop. If you have an issue with someone, talk about it. Open up about it. Don't talk behind your backs. And I will follow up tomorrow with the person who talked to Bill about what you had said, and I'll find out more about exactly what was said.
Yeah.
But I will clarify that.
Okay.
Norm, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
A couple of weeks ago, I think you called me and you said we had had a closed session. We were discussing a legal matter with our attorney, and I think you told me a couple days later that you had a resident tell you that Ben approached them and told them everything about our closed session. I mean, that's ridiculous.
A person called me regarding one of our legal matters in which we had a closed session, and this person called and shared with me their concern about what you were saying, that we're screwed, we're going to get screwed in this matter, we're doing everything wrong, etc. And all I asked the person to do was, tell me what you know, tell me what was said. And everything that this person said was congruent with what we had talked about in our closed session the night before, or a few nights before. That's the type of stuff, Ben, that's just undermines this board. I don't know why you're doing it. You're smarter than that, you know, and you should have the ethical and the dignity to do it in the right way. I just understand why you keep on doing this stuff. It's not helping any of us. It's certainly not helping you either. I'm sure it's not fun sitting here listening to this.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel horrible even having to do this. It's not the role I want to be playing on this board.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll be damned that I'm going to sit here and let unethical behavior continue to go on. My due diligence is that we have to monitor this.
Mm-hmm.
And we shouldn't be wasting our time doing this, Ben. And all we're asking for is that you get on board with us and let's do it right. It's, you know, so I'm just asking for you to really listen to this tonight, because we've had this conversation multiple times. And it never changes. As a matter of fact, lately it's gotten worse, and that's what's become alarming to all of us and why we're doing this tonight. And don't think we're feeling good about having to do this. I dread this meeting tonight, and it's probably the worst meeting that I sat in the 2 years that I've been on this board. And this should never be.
Lisa.
Well, policy governance, I think we work good as a group. I think it's very inappropriate the way that board members are addressing the situation right now. It should have been done in a closed, not session, just separate from a public meeting. I think it's very inappropriate.
These things are being said in public by Ben, so we feel at this point we've tried closed session. We've already done this in closed session. We've done one-on-one. I've met with you with other board members. We've had this discussion in nuance. We've done everything we can do. I agree with you. This isn't the best way to do it. There's no good way to do it.
It's just my point. That's my comment. I'm not going to argue. I'm just going to say that I think it's very inappropriate that it's done this way. It's very upsetting to me.
I'm shaking over here, Lisa, because
It's just
I know
really, it's upsetting, and I don't think this should have been done like this. It's just wrong.
Well, I want to move on to extended public comment at this point in time. So this is going to be restricted to 5 minutes regarding any issue. This is an opportunity for comments only. Questions to the board will not be answered at this time. So who would like to come up for open board comment? Mr. Lettenmuth, would you like to come up?
Sure. I'll try to keep this quick. Certainly, everything's in our township is open records, transparent. You can look up anything or check anything or ask any questions you like. The situation quite possibly affects your township also. It is right across the road from the area where the hospice house is and the string of homes along that way from Allwoods up a half mile. A person named Robert Allen McQuestion bought 111.8 acres on that corner, and it's the northwest corner of M20 and Meridian, and both those are paved roads. He bought it in October of 2012, came in our office in early November, said he would like to know what he could do with that in the way of putting up a building, and we said, the entire parcel is zoned ag, you can't put a commercial building there, it'd be non-conforming. You could put a farm, and then our building inspector, the people in the room were our assessor, our building inspector, and our plumbing inspector, and myself. All four of us explained to him in detail that you could not put a commercial building there. You couldn't operate a business unless you had conditional zoning or a special use permit, and he left. And the next day he came back with a request for a farm building. signed it, that it was going to be agricultural purposes, farm building, and we had followed the county's lead at that time, and we have an affidavit, and I'm imagining you may have one too, you have some farm country, an affidavit stating that this building would only be for farm use. He signed that, it was explicitly explained. He went ahead and did not have to have a building permit. It's farm building, it falls on your cows, no problem, machinery. He did not have electrical permits, plumbing permits, any of it. Within a couple months in early 2013, he moved a business in there. Crawford Contracting is, he literally runs it, but the president is his daughter and the secretary is his son. Moved the business in there and started operating in violation of our ordinances that he was fully aware of. And I'm not sure how you don't have your own police agency here in Union, so we went to the sheriff's department and they said, no, you know, you have your own zoning ordinances, you have to enforce them. So he registered with the state at that address, he was running a business there. It was he had a web page saying this is where, he had an ad in the paper saying apply for jobs at this address. So it's pretty easy to prove it. We went to the magistrate, filed an objection to him breaking those ordinances. He showed up, pled guilty, paid his fines and costs, and was ordered to get out of the building. In the meantime, he had put a huge amount of equipment, probably 40 to 50 vehicles and trashy trailers and sewer pipe and broken cement and gasoline engines turned upside down that were leaking, and just made a mess of it. A pile bigger than this room of garbage that had plastic and pipes and tree limbs and lumber and everything. He was told to clean that up. That didn't get cleaned up. He did get out of the building, came back in 2014 and asked for a special use permit to run that business in that building. We had a public hearing, about 40 people roughly showed up. 38 or 39 of them were in opposition to it. There was one person in favor of it. And we have a set of guidelines for issuing a special use permit. Number one on that is, does it fit the zoning for that area? It was zoned ag, it was a business, it didn't fit. The other 6 he didn't meet either, but we thought if you end up going to court or something, you have to defend one statement rather than all of them. So he did eventually take us to court, and with the idea that he wanted that special use permit and that we had to grant it. He said that his business was farm related. We showed that less than 1% of his income came from farm business, and that was in 2013. 14 and 15, no money. So it went to court. We were able to argue what basically he had done. He tried to block off. Broadway was closed at the bridge when the bridge needed repair. The property was deeded back to the owners on both sides. He tried, our zoning ordinance in Deerfield says that any parcel serving any road serving 3 or more parcels comes under the jurisdiction of the township. He tried to block the road off and tell people that no, that was his road. He did work on it. We require a permit. If you're going to put in a major driveway or work on a road that affects other people, you have to get a $25 permit. He did not get the permit, but went ahead and did the work on the road. He made a complaint against one of the neighbors for having trash when he had an extreme amount of trash. It went to court. We thought we had a very good case. We fought it. The judge said, well, I'm remanding this back to the zoning board of appeals. They didn't like the planning commission decision, so they went to the zoning board of appeals. Our ordinances specifically state you cannot take a planning commission decision, denial or approval, to the zoning board of appeals. It specifically states it can't be done. Our attorney let him do that. After the zoning board of appeals said we support the planning commission and their decision, it went to court. The judge said you have to do more than the one explanation of why you're not giving this to him. So he sent it back to the ZBA. The ZBA said we don't issue special use permits anyway. We didn't do this denial or whatever. They sent it back to the planning commission. We then met and went over in detail each of the items and why it didn't meet the requirements, why it was illegal at that time, and sent a 7 or 8 page letter to the zoning board of appeals. They looked at it, approved it, went back into court, didn't hear anything for a month or more, way more than a month, and finally Judge Irvin said, no, you have to give him this special use permit. And he didn't explain whether he still had to meet any of our criteria for issuing a special use permit. He said the only condition was out of that 111 acres, 107 of it had to be kept in farming in perpetuity. We don't have a police agency, and we don't go around looking for violations, and we really don't want to hold someone to not be able to use that land for a subdivision or whatever might be approved by the township. But he seemed to want that in there, that that land could never be used for anything but farming, except his business. He would have his business there. The trash and stuff that he put, if you look at the field, it doesn't look bad, but there's an old gravel pit there, and all of his equipment was down over the gravel pit. When things flooded and he had a lot of standing water, he dug a trench down to the north branch of the Chippewa River so that that water drained into the river. Number of other violations that we haven't followed up on yet, but at this point we had another meeting. His attorney was delighted and said, we're not doing anything, that we're not meeting any of your requirements. We're just going to get back in that building. You need to give us a special use permit. Our attorney negotiated that they would only operate from 6 until 10, but theirs, when it came back, it said 6 until 10 unless we deem it necessary to operate 24 hours a day there. There were a whole bunch of other ramifications. The final one said that if any dispute arises from any of these conditions, and there are only 3 or 4, that everything goes back to the only one condition, and that was the land be kept in farming for perpetuity. So we had a planning commission meeting this week, I'm losing track of days, this week on Tuesday, and we said at that time we couldn't accept those conditions. So we set another meeting, a public hearing and a meeting where we will issue a special use permit because we were ordered by the court that we had to do that. We will attempt to protect our residents by putting conditions on that, like we would normally do for any of them. He got it back before Judge Irvin again on December 26th. We're supposed to have a show cause hearing on why we haven't issued him this permit yet. To issue a permit, you have to have 16 days publication in the newspapers for the public hearing. So that's being put in the newspaper. We're planning a January 15th public hearing, at which time we will have to issue that special use permit. This could happen in Union, could happen in any township around. Our attorney is Catherine Kaufman. She is also the Township Association's lead attorney. She is an expert in township law, and she's just shaking her head saying, I cannot believe what I'm seeing. Part of what he cited as case law supported our case rather than McQuestion's, but it was granted. So you may run into that. Some of your residents across the street are certainly not happy. A guy named John Slack had a liver transplant and was told that if he got a dust or grass that he could die. It's right across the street from McQuestion's. So we're doing what we can, but be advised this could come up anytime at any township.
I'm going to make one adjustment in our public comment because I do want to have an answer on this, is that I know that there was a question also as to the condition of the road.
That road isn't a Class A road. It's not bonded by McQuestion or anybody at this point. We're already beginning to see where his heavy trucks, he's already taken out a neighbor's mailbox by one of his little boys. He is back operating on that site he never had an occupancy permit to put people in the building. He's back operating on that site again, and the road at this point is beginning to deteriorate wherever he puts his trucks up onto the road. We have control over that driveway, and we're telling him you cannot use that. It benefits other people, and it's not his road. He is measured out, I understand, another route that's supposed to be 100 feet from the nearest house. We tried to get 100 feet from the property line. Then a house sits in the middle of an acre. The trucks right now are going probably the width of this room from that house at 5:30 in the morning and whenever they happen to go. We're trying to get conditions in our special use permit that he has to have
a flat paved area where he enters onto Meridian Road, but we have not been able to get any communication, any cooperation out of him yet, so we really don't expect it to happen now.
All right. Thank you, Roger.
Yep, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that moves us on to item 12, unless anybody else wants to come up for public comment. Yes.
Hi, Deborah Gray Frankie on behalf of Deborah and Trevor Frankie, 905 South Mission. Just a couple of comments as I'm listening to the discussion this evening. There were a couple of themes, and you know, some of those themes were what's in the best interest of residents, the well-being and public interest, best interest of the community, conducting business ethically. There was a nomination and an approval for Bill Nyer for Board of Review, and part of the comment for Mr. Nyer was he's a businessman who employs many people in the community. And so as I listen to this, I want to apologize for my outburst during your vote. It's sort of a point of frustration to hear you make these comments and to have come before this board and say, you guys, look into a fledgling industry, and to feel like that's not heard. It's very frustrating. And to see this on an agenda without input from any longstanding business people in this community, it's very frustrating. I really feel like Union Township is missing out on an opportunity here, and opportunities for women, minorities, in a business that can bring revenue and good to a community. And Mark, you made a comment which I don't know how apprised the board is with the law, but if I was someone looking at this, you know, from the outside looking in, I think I would be left with the maybe impression that a business person could come in and impose a business on you without your permission. And under the law right now, and there's no indication that Lara is going to react any differently for recreational, they're doing such a great job of really vetting business owners, and you can't get a permit without getting the input and the okay from the community, from whatever, from the city or the township in which you're operating. So I don't like the implication that a business is going to be imposed or going to come in without the township's knowledge. It's just not true. I would ask that the board stop. You guys did not rush to opt in, but I would ask that you stop and really investigate this. Get a committee of people to look into it before you make a decision. And I'll be fine, of course I'll have to be, but I'll be fine with the decision if the decision is no. I'm not fine with it though if the decision is no without looking into it. It's not right. So I would ask that you be held to what I'm hearing the board is saying, that you're about the well-being and the public interest in this community. I heard that in your voices tonight, for sure. So I would ask that you think about this business with that in mind, and not just your own predisposition to being for or against marijuana as a drug. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other opportunities for public comment? We look and see none, so we close public comment, and we move to item 12, manager's comments. Mark.
Thank you. Just one, maybe two. Reminder that Ms. Chaffee, the assistant to the assessor, is leaving at the end of the year, so if you cross paths with her, you might want to wish her luck. The job description, so we're in the process of getting that position filled. As we do with any opening, we've reviewed the job description. We made a couple minor changes to it with input from the finance director and the assessor. The position is ready to be posted, so we'll be getting that posted. The changes do include some changes in the wording of the responsibilities to make it a little bit more broad and to have it fit with. So the job description actually describes what the position is currently doing. In addition to the work on the assessing side, there's quite a bit of work on the tax, what I'll call the property taxation side of the whole taxation assessing business. So I wanted to make sure that was incorporated in the job description. And also, right now the title is assistant to the assessor. I think we're going to be changing that to assessing / general property tax specialist. None of these changes change the degree of complexity of the job, levels of responsibilities, authorities of the position. Of course, it will be reviewed with the study that's going on right now. So I just want to let the board know that. And I could see the posting going up yet before the end of the year, both internally and externally. It is a bargaining group position. And then the last thing is just wishing everyone a safe and joyous holiday.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas. All right, and that brings us to item 13, final board comments. Start with Phil.
When it came to that item on our agenda about the marijuana prohibition, one thing I didn't like about the prohibition that we had before us was there wasn't like a sunset date where it would end. I know the idea was that we could kind of protect ourselves. As you mentioned to me, Norm, you know, we may or may not have the rules and regulations in place to regulate such a business as maybe it'd be a retail marijuana establishment. So I was not going to vote for it if it had come before us because of that. There wasn't that sunset clause in it that I'm describing. And the reason that I'd want to have that in is that I just think that when I look around at you know, other prohibitions that we've had in the past, it's been almost 100 years ago that we had a prohibition against alcohol, but that passed. And what do we have now is we have alcohol for sale, you know, at gas stations. In our township, we have alcohol for sale at the corner store in our township. And we regulate those in a sense. We have one of our staff goes to those locations to you know, check off qualifications so they can maintain their license. We get revenue from the state to do that. None of us today know what those regulations are going to be like. I suspect that they're probably very similar to the medical marijuana regulations that have been put into place, because the state put a lot of time and effort into that through the licensing and, well, LARA, the LARA Department of Michigan. So not having a clear crystal ball, I just think that I can connect some dots and see what the future is going to be. So I'd hate to put a limit. I would hate to prohibit such businesses going into the future, because I think we could, you know, if we had some foresight, we could begin the process of putting some kind of rules and regulations in place. That I wouldn't support any that would exceed, I would not support any rules and regulations that would exceed the local control that we have over the distribution of alcohol. Because I'm seeing that with the public support that there is for marijuana, of recreational marijuana in this state. Well over half of the population said yes to it, that when I wear my township trustee hat, I wouldn't want to get in the way of the public view. And Merry Christmas to all, and a Happy New Year, and travel safe.
All right, thank you, Bill. Bill?
I just had a question for Mark. I know last year, this is our recommended budget. Did you want our books turned back in? Do you have any updates to do for next year, and then we'll get them back? I think we did that last year. So, or is this the approved budget now, or we don't have any additions that we need to put in our book, right?
We will generate a new document, and I'll send out copies. It'll be hole punched, and I'll have some instructions so that you don't need to hand that binder back into me, but you'll be told what to take out and put in. And
All right.
so
Sounds good. Merry Christmas to everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Bill, Norm?
Yeah, I want to say that this was obviously, I think, the most difficult meeting that I personally have ever attended in my life. And I hope that we never have to go through something like this again. The good news is that I know sometimes you have to just clear the air in order to push the restart and, recalibrate and move forward. I really hope that we can pull together, because we do so many good things in this community already, despite some of the issues we've been struggling with. I would like to see the unity, the respect, the solidarity, the open disclosure, that we talk to one another, that we can agree to disagree, that we don't right away make innuendos and begin to do derogatory things, but work proactively. I think it still can be accomplished. So I hope that after tonight we can move forward, and I think it'd be a wonderful New Year's gift to give to us, to our township, to our residents, and to our community. And lastly, I just want to say, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, and I just want to hope that everyone has a good holiday and be safe. Thank you.
All right, Lisa?
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
All right, keep it short but sweet, huh?
Yep.
All right, I do piggyback onto what Phil was talking about, and I think that we should make it a priority moving into the new year to maybe do what Mrs. Frankie was talking about, is to maybe create a commission or a committee where we could start maybe, figuring out, looking at the medical marijuana laws and decide, what is our position on this? Because we really haven't discussed that. Yes?
I got a quick question, but about the recreational marijuana, is that something we can have McKenna do, like when they're doing the zoning? Or is that, Mark, is that something they can look into, or is it too early for them to start on that?
they will be doing some of that, and I mean, there's some templates out there, and the folks are starting to rough in zoning code. It's pretty rough because they don't know, what the regs are yet. But we've had discussion with McKenna about beginning to draft some zoning ordinances that would regulate the establishments, assuming that at some point, whether this, let's just say, for instance, this resolution would have passed, that it would be rescinded at some point. In anticipation of it being rescinded, we've had discussion with them about developing some regs, since they're already looking at our zoning code.
But seeing how we didn't pass this, that means that we're automatically, we need to make a zoning code, correct, or no? Like, we should work on it.
We will, yes, we will need to. And we will start that process, because a business would be able to establish itself in here, and we don't have any regulations, and they can go wherever they want. Not knowing what the state
Would that go to the planning commission?
is gonna
then?
know. Not knowing what the state regs are gonna be. And so we will want to draft some regulations in the zoning code to govern those businesses.
All right, I was halfway between somewhere in there.
Sorry about
But
that.
anyways, so you know, I would like to see us at some point in time to make it a priority in the coming year. You know, the medical marijuana laws have already been established, the regulations have already been established. You know, there's been stories in the newspaper about 2 ex-Lions players who, you know, were denied a medical marijuana license because one had a traffic ticket they didn't pay in Georgia. You know, so that shows you how the state is actually monitoring and vetting, you know, these people. So that want to start legitimate businesses because it is legal. And it does have health benefits in the city. Our neighbor to the middle, which we surround, has already, you know, done this. So I think that we do have to, you know, move forward and try to, you know, have some meaningful conversation. So I'm hopeful that that's going to happen in the new year. Otherwise, thank you for your input. Input goes, you know, it's taken to heart. And I appreciate it. And moving forward to next week, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to y'all. And to Bill, go green.
I'll let you buy me lunch if you want to go to lunch.
Go green.
Go white.
There we go. All right. That wasn't so hard.
Get with it, Bill.
I know, I'm thinking about other
A
things.
little slow in the draw there, dude. Okay, Mr. Micus.
Sure, I move that we adjourn.
Lisa seconds it.
I do second.
All right. I'm sorry to hear that you missed your mother's birthday, too. That stunk. So, but you made it up for it, right?
Yeah, my sister's birthday was